I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Esther J. Cepeda, here to remind you that if you cut a small notch in the center of your toenail's edge, it won't ingrow as you're out there traversing the great concavity.
It's great.
Oh,
I don't think we'll ever run out of these intro lines, will we? We'll have an infinite amount of them.
That's the thing. There's too much data to there's too much material to draw from that I think we're going to be okay.
Maybe episode like 3,000. Someone would repeat one.
I don't know.
I would be delighted if you guys got to episode 3,000. I would listen to them all.
I will be 294 years old.
Yeah. We'll see how far medical technology gets us in the next 40 years here. Hey, Matt.
Yeah, that would be something.
Esther, welcome to episode 42. It's so great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We think of you kind of as maybe our most enthusiastic person engaging with us on Twitter and other places.
Scary stalker is what you're saying, right?
Not at all.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, good. I am really just enthusiastic. I love the things I love with great passion.
I think
we all have that in common, right? The three of us.
Totally.
Seems to be a trait that's brought us all here this evening.
Yeah.
From Austin, Chicago, and Victoria.
Absolutely.
Cool. So episode 42, Esther, it's great to have you. Your name was mentioned last episode. I mispronounced your last name, and Matt corrected me.
Oh, that's okay. Everybody mispronounces it.
Oh, okay.
My own husband calls me Esther J. Potato.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's all right then.
It's fine.
I feel less awful.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know who Esther is primarily your main day job is that you are a journalist. So maybe walk us through a bit of that. And obviously the guy we talk about here, David Foster Wallace, did some journalism. So that'll be something we cover tonight. We're going to talk a bit about what it's like to read Wallace as more of a fan reader than from a scholarship perspective. And any other kind of pop culture things that come to mind. At this present cultural moment we find ourselves in with Wallace and other things. So give us a bit about your background, Esther. What brings you to the show here?
So I have been just an incredible reader and a lover of reading journalism for my entire life. Like we always had newspapers in the house. So growing up, I really wanted to be a Sun-Times journalist. And I was that weirdo kid who was like maybe 10 years old and would sit on Sunday mornings and watch the McLaughlin Group and watch Meet the Press. And I thought, I want to grow up and do that. I want to be in the Washington Post or whatever. So my parents were like, no, you got to get a marketing degree or something. So you're not going to be a writer, much less a reporter. So I did do that. And then I was actually at home after having my first child, and I just started like writing prolific letters to the editor. And the first time, this was to Sun-Times, the first time I got my letter published, I was like, whoa, this is it. This is like this is the thing.
You've been immortalized.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I can do this. And actually, I did start writing op-eds for the Chicago Sun-Times. I actually ended up being a reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. I wheedled my editors until they gave me a column just to shut me up. And I did that for a couple of years. And then, of course, the newspaper industry immediately started tanking. And I started writing a blog after, a round of layoffs and buyouts and blah, blah, blah. And I had been pitching my column to national syndicates for probably 2 years at that point. And surely enough, the Washington Post Writers Group said, hey, are you interested in writing your column? And I said, yes, thank you. So I got on with them in 2010. And I'm on my I want to say my 915th column with them.
Wow.
And, Yeah, so I write 2 a week. When I started, I used to write 3 a week. It was really, really intense. So I actually teach during the day and write, part of the day and at night. So I have my foot in two worlds. So because I write a lot about education, it's something that's really important to me. So it's really good for me to sort of be in that world as well. But when I'm not doing that, I am writing or reading, because you can't write if you don't read. And that's sort of how I, came to be the person that writes and reads all the time.
And what do you consider your beat? Because, I've read a lot of stuff you've written lately about immigration, but I feel like that's partly because it's just in the news, so much in the past couple of years. But do you have, like, what you consider your regular topics?
I do, but they're not a beat. So I'm writing about everything and anything. Like, because there are so few Hispanic opinion journalists and thought leaders out there, I do tend to write a lot about Hispanic issues and Latino issues, and that's sort of where the education piece comes in, health, politics, those sorts of things. But, I'm really careful about not being pigeonholed as anything in particular, because like any other person, I contain multitudes and I love so many things. So I will write about anything. Like, my editors will let me write about anything. So if I really want to write about Moby Dick, or if I want to write about a book that I read, or if I want to write about a movie or something completely cultural or something totally off the wall, like scientific research on sleep, just anything, I'm just going to where I'm interested. That's like the criteria. Yeah, it's just like whatever I think is interesting and that other people should know about because it's important or interesting.
Cool.
That's really great. And I want to back up a little bit and ask you if you remember, when was the first time you read Wallace, or how you got introduced to his work?
Absolutely. So this is you're going to hate this, but it's okay. I can deal with it. So back in 2015, in May, Stephen King wrote this opinion piece about if a novelist can be too productive. And I love Stephen King, and I've read everything he's written, including the nonfiction books about how to write, etc. And he mentioned several books in this column. And one of them was Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, and I read that and I thought it was amazing. And in the same paragraph, he talked about Jonathan Franzen, and I was like, oh, that's the guy maybe from the Oprah thing, maybe. And I didn't really I didn't really think about it because, I think I don't know if I've said this before, but I'm just a reader. Like, I'm just somebody who just enjoys literature and reading. And so I was looking back into it. I think I was in a dry spell, and I found another Stephen King article, and he was talking about how much he loved Jonathan Franzen. And I was like, okay, let's see what this Jonathan Franzen business is all about. So I started reading some Jonathan Franzen, and one of the first things that I actually looked into was this really long thing that he did about the Chicago post office. And it was so well done. It was so spot on. And then I sort of started reading a lot more of his essays, and I read the novels, which I really, really liked. And then I read the last collection of essays, and he kept talking about this guy, David Foster Wallace, and Infinite Jest, and he just kept going on and on about it. And I was like, well, this person must be like the super
It's a farther
awesome
away,
dude.
Right? It's a farther away.
Yeah, más afuera. Yeah, más afuera. And I thought, okay, this Infinite Jest thing, all right, I get it. I will read Infinite Jest. So I picked up Infinite Jest. Like, that was it. Like, that, I hadn't really read anything else by Wallace that I knew of. It turns out that I had read a couple of things by him that I didn't know they were by him. But that was the one that I just started reading it, and I thought, oh, this was written for me. This is like, this is speaking directly to me in the way that, like, I I wrote. Like, I never encountered his writing before, but if I, were to go back to my journals from when I was in high school, this is how I wrote. Like, and it's not a good look. You know what I mean? It's not a good look when you're like a 16-year-old in high school, but just the long sentences, the high vocabulary, it's just like the fireworks, the clearly showing off. And it was just delicious. And I just adored it. And then, so I finished reading Infinite Jest, and then I read everything else. I've read everything except the Infinity book and Signifying Wrappers.
What about Fate, Time, and Language? Have you read that?
I've read excerpts of that.
Master's thesis in philosophy. It's brutal.
Yeah, I've read excerpts of that, and it's like, I'm not qualified to read this because and since Nobody I'm not an academic, there's no reason for me to. So that's basically how I got into it, and then I became this complete annoyance and bore around my house because I did my first reading was a back-to-back reading. Like, I finished the last page and I turned the book around and I started from the first page. And so my sons and my husband had 4 months of just hearing about Infinite Jest. And so I finally wore my husband down and I got him to read it, and he loved it as well. Okay. And if you asked my kids, they will tell you that they're under strict rules, under threat of me codifying this in my will, that if I die, they have to read Infinite Jest before anything is released to them in my will.
Even I don't have that in my will.
That's a good idea to me. This is Dave, I think I remember you saying something in one of the early episodes about how if you haven't read Infinite Jest, you can't really know me. And that's how I feel. Like, this is such an important part of my life at this point. And there are other books that are that way.
Did you say that to your husband, though? Is that
totally.
How you got him to read
I'm like, you've got to read this. Because I said that to Rachel,
or in front of Rachel, and she was like, that's pretty offensive, man.
But there are other books that I go back to over and over and over again, and they get it. But this one is of such a scale, and you get to know so many people that they become part of your life in a way that, I don't know. I adore 100 Years of Solitude, and I've read that book over and over again, but I don't find myself sitting at the dinner table talking about those characters in the way that I do with my sons and my husband. So I guess, it's just of a different magnitude. So take from that what you will. People will say, well, she's got a twisted, horrible brain. And yeah, sure. But, that's my jam. So
you just reread Infinite Jest very recently, right?
Yes. So I finished it 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So I think maybe that was my 4th or my 5th reading. It's something that I've decided to do every year. There are books that I really do read every year. Like The Sea Wolf is one of the things that I read every year. I read a lot of Jack London every year. Let me think. I probably listen to 100 Years of Solitude every year because I listen to it in English and in Spanish. And there's just a lot of things that I go back to every year. And this is one of the ones that's going to be every year, I can tell, because it has been every year since I picked it up.
Wow. And how long did it take you to do that? It seemed like on Twitter you were reading it incredibly fast.
Yeah, well, because I read really fast, and then I read on Kindle/Kindle app on my phone /audiobook/ the actual book. So it's sort of just everywhere. Wow. And once you get into the stories and, once you get past that second reading and everybody and you can be like, oh, this is the part that you can it's just so easy to let the story take you that it's not hard work anymore.
True, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just very easy to pick it up. I'm driving to the grocery store. I'm listening on an audiobook. I'm, reading it on a Sunday afternoon. I'm looking at it while I'm in the line at the grocery store on my phone. I used to, a couple of times I did it where I was listening to the audiobook and then I had my Kindle with me so that I could look at the footnotes while I was listening. So I've done it in all different kinds of ways. So yeah, I walk my dogs a lot and I do listen to a lot of it when I'm doing things like walking my dogs. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. What have been like the most rewarding, I guess, really obscure connections that you've noticed between your different reads? Because you've read it 5 times in the last 3 years or whatever. That's pretty rapid. What are the most rewarding things about the rereads that you've come across so far?
I think that what's most fun for me is to make those connections, like, oh, this is the guy at the beginning who was with the girl who was in trouble because, she didn't want her her mother's boyfriend touching her, at the end getting into this fight, at AA with this guy who was calling him Mr. Toady, like making these weird connections between the characters. And, and I still don't have it down. Like a lot of them, it's just like you just let it flow over you and you remember the stories. But just making those connections, like I read not all and not linearly Elegant Complexity, and I was seeing all these connections and it was almost too much. I was like, I sort of need to make these connections one by one. So that was just a lot of fun. It's just mind-boggling how he wrote something that's so rich that you could just go back to and you're going to find something new. You're going to make a new connection and you're going to remember something and go, oh, I love the way that was said, just over and over again. And I mean, I could say the same thing about The Stand. I think my husband reads The Stand every year. I probably get to it less often than that, but you just never get tired of it. It's like, 1,000 some pages and you just don't get tired of it. Every time you read it, you're like, oh, I love this. I didn't remember this, and I did remember that. So,
And you mentioned other books that you go back and reread, including The Sea Wolf by Jack London. I've never read that. Can you give us a little, quick summary of that?
Let me see. The Sea Wolf is a book about, what's a book about? Basically, this dude goes out to sea and he's a writer and he ends up on this ship that he didn't even really want to be on. He gets into a ship crash and he gets pulled out of the sea by this brutal monster, this Larson fellow. And he's just like, you got to get me off of here. And he gets his clothes stolen. He basically gets hazed and put into slavery. And then there's another shipwreck. And then this woman gets on this ship and she turns out to be this literary star. So here are these 2 writers who are incredibly learned and New York types. They're out on the sea on this boat with this terrible monster who's actually really interesting and really smart and has these very specific philosophical ideas about how life should be lived, and he's always quoting the Bible. And there's this tussle between the brutalism of a physical life that's difficult, being out on the sea back in the 1800s, early 1900s was no walk in the park. And then these people are all like having they're sharing all these ideas. And then, they're trying to get away from him ultimately because they need to get off of this ship, and he's going crazy because something's clearly wrong with him. And, these 2 literary types are starting to fall in love with each other, but that causes problems because, the pretty girl on the ship is wanted by many people. And it's just like, again, I'm not doing it justice, but it's like a jumble of all these crazy things put together. And I don't know. Every year I read it and and I'm like, my husband's bought me special editions of it. So I've got a couple of different ones. It's like beautiful illustrations and the gold leaf on the end. And it's just one of those stories that I don't even think, you know what I mean? Like you don't even think, you just listen to a story, you read a story the way you would if you were sitting by a campfire. You're just so in the moment. I mean, I don't approach literature from that critical perspective. And I'm not necessarily proud of that. I wish I had that skill, but I'm not an academic. So I'm really just taking things in as entertainment, as thought-provoking pleasure.
Mm-hmm. That sounds nice.
I totally agree. I mean, I totally get that. And I love a lot of other Jack London stuff. I probably read White Fang the most to my kids. It's a really great bedtime book. But what are some other books? You mentioned a couple of others that you really connect with or reread a lot.
Sure. So there's 100 Years of Solitude, which is I love that book. It's again, a big, wide-ranging, like crazy just book about this family in Latin America and, the whole magical realism thing. And it's like a fever dream. That book is like a fever dream. I don't know. I'm not doing it any justice whatsoever, but it speaks to me. And
when did you first read that?
Very recently, actually.
Really?
Like I'd say within the last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Like I just, because everybody's always like, oh, you got to read this. And, okay, I will. And then you're like, oh, wow, this is really, right? Yeah. Oh,
got to catch them all.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then
The Road by Cormac McCarthy was on there. So,
yeah, you
she's
can't.
got some okay taste.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't complain. Anything that gets more people reading, you can't complain. But I don't know. I'm drawing a bit. I really do read a lot of Jack London. I did a really great interview with Earl Labor, who is the gentleman who is the person that wrote the definitive biography of Jack London. And he was just so passionate about this topic. He's getting on in years, and I specifically sort of interviewed him when he published his most recent biography of London. I want to say a few years ago, I don't remember, but I remember thinking I need to talk to him and ask him all kinds of stuff not related to this book, because when he passes, I want to be able to write about him again, because you have to sort of, you got to bank things, put them put them on the shelf so that they can be useful later. But he was just enormously passionate about London, and I am too. So that was fun. I read a lot of Stephen King books a lot because he was one of my formative influences. Like I read a lot of Stephen King when I was young. So, and I continue to do so. I just downloaded the newest one. It's a real shorty, so I'm looking forward to it. What else?
So I have a Stephen King story. You want to hear my Stephen King story?
Oh, yes, please.
So I was a big fan of Stephen King as a kid. My dad had all of his books. This is up into the mid to late 80s. And so did a friend of mine, my best friend. His mom had a ton of Stephen King books at the house. And it was like an occasion, when he came out with a new one, it would be #1 New York Times bestseller. It was really a big occasion. And so I moved away from that friend between junior and senior year of high school and moved to Colorado. And, I never had an opportunity to see Stephen King or anything until I moved to Colorado. And like right away, it was announced that he would be reading from his newest book, like in a few weeks. And he had just had this motorcycle accident, right? Where he, not motorcycle, but he got hit on the side of the road, right?
Oh yeah.
I think I have the timeline of this right, and that this was like 1995.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Maybe I've got this all wrong, but he rode a motorcycle across the U.S. on this tour. It was for a kind of bad book called Insomnia.
And don't say that.
I thought you were going to say
book.
Bad Boy book.
It's kind of a bad book. It's not his greatest book. I don't think.
Well, maybe
it's not even in the top 10, Esther. Come on.
Oh, Matt, you obviously sleep well at night. Just admit it. Do you? Because I've suffered from insomnia intermittently in my life, and that book like totally talks to me. Well, so maybe I'm biased because of that.
I think it has a good premise. It's just, this is going to sound really ironic. It's too long.
Well, you could say that a lot about a lot of King's books. That's like the one thing you have to forgive him for. Sometimes it just goes on a little too much.
Yeah, but it was a great experience to be able to see him, and it was like right around Halloween, and made all of my friends super jealous. He did not have a costume because he was riding on a motorcycle.
He's Stephen King. That's his costume.
You know what? Esther probably knows this better. So he rode along in a motorcycle, but had like a guy in a truck hauling a trailer behind him so that I don't know, at night or if it rained or something, he would just put the bike in the trailer and ride in the truck.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that shows up in one of his later books from the later 90s or early 2000s. A lot of it runs together for me, but what I do,
me too.
One thing I do remember is on that motorcycle trip, he was really impressed that east of Colorado Springs, there was a little town called Yoder. And it sounded like the way that a guy from Maine would say Yoda. Right? It was like Yoda. And so I think that he was always looking for more names and stuff like this. And he just made a huge deal out of any time he found a name that he thought was really funny. So it was really interesting to get to meet him briefly during that time.
Did you get your book signed?
Oh, of course.
Oh, that's so neat.
But I thought, of all the books, there's got to be this crappy one.
Couldn't have been hilarious. Like Cujo or something, huh?
I got the Insomnia. It's not his greatest book.
That's hilarious.
So if I think of what other that book was, I think it was the one that was two. It's like Desperation, and another one where they were packaged together. Yes. One is a Richard Bachman book. I think one of those has the motorcycle guy in it, which is like based on that book tour that he did.
Interesting.
But if I find it, I'll add it to the show notes. So.
Oh, yeah, do. I know I had it, a couple of years ago, I moved my house. I moved to a different home, and it was like, are we really going to take all these books with us? I mean, we had so many books. And I had like every single Stephen King book, and I gave them all away. I only have one left. I only have Under the Dome, and that's not true. I have Under the Dome, and I think I probably have a copy of The Stand, but they're so heavy, they like hurt your wrist, and it's easier like when your eyesight starts going to, just go on Kindle and make the type really, really big. And it's, as you get older, these
when
things
I see my
really
parents'
do matter.
iPhones, how big they have the text for texting, I just like cry laughing every time.
Yes.
I have mine set to the smallest it can go on purpose.
Yeah.
So I like the way
I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. I am definitely getting there. And the more you read, the worse your eyes get. So yeah.
Matt, you're screwed, buddy.
I know.
At least I'm playing board games. That gives me a bit
protect
more
you. So, Stephen King, can you give us a few of your other? You already said The Stand. That's one of your favorites. Insomnia. Yeah. You like that. And what are some other ones that you like? I'm super interested into this. I
really like the whole Dark Tower series, like every single one of the Dark Tower series, and then the Wizard and the not the Wizard and the Glass, the Wind Through the Keyhole, which was the extra book, and then the Green Dragon. Was it the Green Dragon? It's the Green
Eyes of the Dragon.
The Eyes of the
Green
Dragon.
Mile. The Green Mile.
No. I'm thinking of the Eyes of the Dragon, which is somewhat, but not exactly related to the Dark Tower series. And I just love that book. It is just a fairy tale of a book. And I felt like The Wind Through the Keyhole was that way as well, even though it was very much related to the Dark Tower. But I really loved that whole entire series. Probably not every single book as much as the other, but just every single one of those books went together so well, and I just remember enjoying them immensely. I've enjoyed them since. Like, I know I've read here and there. I did not go see that movie because everybody said that it was horrible, and it did not at all, go by the book, so I didn't bother seeing it. But yeah, I don't remember which one I reread when it came out, just in solidarity with King. And I adored Under the Dome. And the JFK one was really
11/22/63.
Yes.
I love that one.
And the adaptation of it that Hulu did was really top notch for what it was. It was really good. It was really good. And I'm not a super big James Franco fan, but he was fantastic in it, and I thought the whole thing was great. I haven't caught the. Have
you seen The Disaster Artist yet?
No,
with James Franco,
I really don't. I don't
run
run out to see James Franco movies at all. If he's in something that I like, like, oh, I loved him in Pineapple Express. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some things that I really like, but he's not like the big draw for me. And what else was I going to say? What other one? I have not watched any of the Mr. Mercedes TV adaptation, but I'm sort of looking forward to more of those coming out so I can sort of binge watch them. And I love, like I said, I love Under the Dome so much that when I started watching the TV series adaptation, I was probably halfway into the first episode and I was like, nope, not doing it.
Yeah, I heard it was kind of bad.
I just dumped it and I was like, sorry, hun, if you want to watch this without me, that's fine, but this is not right for me.
No, see, I can probably budget time in my life to read Under the Dome and some of these 1,000-page novels, but not also go and watch all of the movies. So how do you find the time, Esther?
How do I find the time? Well, my life is incredibly regimented by routine. Like routine runs my life. If I didn't have my routines, my life would fall apart. So every Friday night I watch 3 45-minute episodes of something with my husband. And then on Saturday, I probably watch another 3 45-minute installments of something else, either with my husband or like with my kids. So like, for instance, last week, Friday night, I watched 3 episodes of The Man in the High Castle, the latest one.
Okay.
And then on Saturday, we watched I love it.
I'm current before this season though, but I saw that it just dropped on Amazon Prime.
I live and die for those costumes. Probably sounds horrible, but I just love any kind of costume movie I'm really into, and the costumes in this one are just really, really good. I'm that really annoying person that goes to Star Wars movies and is like delighted by the costumes, but not really anything else. Not really a Star Wars fan.
Do you do cosplay when you go to them? Do you dress up yourself? No. Is that how into the costumes you are?
No, I'm so into the costumes that like I will study about the costumes and I will look at the artist drawings and I will look up the designers that did it. Like I remember I went on this whole tear about the Praetorian Guard from the last movie that came out at Christmas last year. And I just adored the costumes of those. I call them the Lobstermen. It was Snoke's Imperial Praetorian Guard. And I just love that scene so much. And I just like super went in deep to the guy that designed them and people that make them and the materials that you can make them out of and, drawings and how they, evolved. And I love that. But anyway.
So if Michael Schur ever puts Infinite Jest on the screen, who's your recommendation for costume design? Are you that into that world that you could name the person that you think would do the best job of it?
I couldn't. Penniless? No, I don't. I don't know. I'm the person that like, I will watch the credits to a movie. I really do enjoy watching the credits to the movie, and I'll be like, oh, the costume designer was blah blah blah, and then I immediately forget that name. So I'm more than happy to talk about the costumes in XYZ show or movie, but I don't have costume designers that I follow per se. Yeah, cool. So I'm not that in that.
That'd
deep.
Be pretty
but
deep.
But believe me, if that Infinite Jest movie did come around, I would put the time in and I would like send Michael Schur and his people some recommendations. Okay, let's just put it that way. So anyway, I watched 3 episodes of Man in the High Castle on Friday, and then the first 3 episodes of the new season of The Walking Dead on Saturday with my son and my husband. So
is that season
was
like
my
22 now? What are they at?
No, it's season 9.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
It's really dragged on.
They've really dragged that show out, haven't they?
I mostly watch for my son. There are some really enjoyable parts to it, but I tend to find myself disagreeing with many of the decisions that are made by the leadership on that show, and I get very frustrated. But you hang with something for 9 years, you're going to keep watching it.
I've hung in with a lot of garbage for that reason.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Sons of Anarchy comes to mind the most.
Yes. Oh, I watched every single episode of Sons of Anarchy.
We did too, but we hated the last 3 seasons. We were like, oh, why do we keep watching this? Is the worst. We've come this far,
They were, some of them were really hard to get through. But have you watched the Mayans MC continuation.
Was there a spin-off of that? No, I didn't know that.
Yes, it's the Mayans MC, and
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh.
all the Latino,
thank you.
motorcycle. Well, I mean, I wanted to get excited about it, and I called the people, or I sent in an inquiry to the press people, and I was like, get me to talk to Kurt Sutter. I'd love to hear about what it's like to write as a white man for, this predominantly Latino motorcycle club when Latinos are so demonized in America, and, they're...
Well, that's an interesting question,
They're considered gang members, and, the president's putting them down, and the publicist was like, yes, we're definitely going to do that. And I hounded her for like 3 months. And then next thing I know, the thing premiered, and it was like 3 episodes in, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess that didn't happen. So I never watched it because they never sent me the advanced screeners. No, they never sent me the advanced screeners. And then I was like, oh gosh, I guess I missed the boat. So maybe if the episode or the season ends, and then I could sort of binge watch them, because that's obviously how I take in my TV and film, then maybe that'll be interesting. But who knows? I don't know if it's any good. I don't think I even read reviews about it, to be frank. So I don't know.
What show was that?
It's called Mayans MC. It's a spin-off of Sons of Anarchy.
Wow. Okay.
From AMC.
I'm definitely gonna.
We lost Matt a while ago, Esther.
Take a back seat on that.
He started reading a book.
I finished one.
He's got a big stack.
Okay.
You're like Samantha from Her, which I just rewatched on Saturday, because I went to a Halloween party on Saturday night, and I went as Theodore Twombly, just Joaquin Phoenix's character. So I was kind of like watching the movie to get some ideas, and she talks about how she, like in their opening conversation, she read a 80,000 name, like how to name your child book, and she picked her name in like the 1 second between their pause in their conversation. That's Matt Booker. He's approaching that.
Nice.
No, it's not.
But for postmodern American fiction.
I think Esther can have us beat. And, your story about discovering Wallace through Franzen is pretty similar to the way that I discovered like John Updike and Vladimir Nabokov, which is through the Nicholson Baker book, You and I, which is probably not the ideal way to do it. I mean, I don't know if there is an ideal way to do it, but like this happens, right? If you're a reader and you kind of jump from one thing to another, tell us more about that stuff. Like, I assume you still read that way, right? Like you hear about someone, like how do you discover new books? How do you discover new stuff?
Oh, it's super boring. I read the New York Times review of books. This is like the super most boring way to find out about new books. And then the Amazon Corporation just knows what I read, and it recommends stuff to me. I know
that was really the way that I discovered early stuff too. When I got into this kind of literature, was just like people who bought this also bought, and I would just like click on that, read about it.
Exactly.
That sounds cool. I'll buy that.
I talk to people that I really like about what I'm reading, and they tell me about what they're reading. So I keep a note on my iPhone of all of the books that I want to read, because someone has told me, oh, this is really good. Yeah. Or, oh, I really like this, or you would like that. So I do keep a running list of books that I want to read. And, depending on whether they come out on Kindle or whether they become an audiobook, etc., I keep going. And
Has
a lot of times,
anyone ever recommended Infinite Jest to you after the fact?
No.
Or do you beat them to the punch?
I don't know. It doesn't really, I don't travel in the kind of circles where that would be, a topic of conversation. I hate to break it to you, but teachers in the American public school system, they're not really like super delving into literature.
Have you watched the TV show The Affair?
No, it's on my list.
Yeah,
no.
Dominic, what's the guy's name?
It's
from The Wire.
From The Wire, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so he's in a TV show called The Affair, and I think in season 2 or 3, he's a high school teacher, a literature teacher. He gets suspended, and he has to go to this kind of like room for 2 months with other suspended teachers, and the guy next to him is reading
the rubber
Infinite
rooms
Jest.
of New York, yeah.
Yeah, and so they have like a minute or two long conversation specifically about the book. I mean,
that's hilarious.
Pop culture's given you guys a little bit of an edge there, I guess, but maybe it's not the norm.
Yeah, I don't know. And then, of course, also, like, I read a lot of journalism. Like, I read a lot of books about journalism because I really love nonfiction, and I have all these crazy interests. So I've read, I can't tell you how many books about cadavers and death and cannibalism I've read, and like reanimating corpses I've read just in the last year, like probably 5 or 6. Just like I get on a tear about something and I just really like following, like, what is Mary Roach, stiff. Yeah, exactly. So I get really into something, and then I have these crazy little interests that like nobody else has. So I'm like super into container ships. So
Season 2 of The Wire.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Right. Good job,
exactly. Bravo. So one of my books that I absolutely adore and is on I always recommend this book to people. It's called 90% of Everything by Rose George. And it's only a few years old. And basically she hops on a container ship and she traces, how these people go and how the whole container ship system works. And very, very recently, a book called Into the Raging Sea by Rachel Slade came out. And it talks about the sinking of the ship El Faro. And it's just captivating. It's
Did you just read
exciting.
that Keith Gesson piece that was in the New Yorker about taking a container ship through the Northwest Passage? Did you read this?
I'll have to look that. I'll have to look into that.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes. You would love
Yes.
it. But it's a lot of those similar stories where a journalist gets on board, and a lot of people don't realize that they do take on passengers, and they have a certain number of cabins just for passengers.
Yeah.
They go all over the world constantly to every known port. So it's actually a pretty cheap way to see the world is travel by container ship.
Well, I think that's a really good option for me because I really, really want to take a ship somewhere that's not a cruise. So I would love to do that. Like I always say, I wish that like the Cunard Corporation would start like ferrying people from New York to London again, just not as a cruise ship with a buffet and a pool, but just to take that kind of sea voyage. And I don't know about you, but I'm super psyched about that new Titanic. I would totally get on that new Titanic.
Oh, are they remaking it? I've not heard about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Titanic 2. Yeah.
They didn't learn their lesson the first time, huh?
Nope.
All those icebergs have
Seems
melted.
bad. Oh, that's true, yeah.
They have melted.
No, it's like off the coast of Nova Scotia or something like that, like really far south.
Newfoundland.
Yeah.
This aligns with one of my strong interests, Esther, which is Antarctica. And so there are a lot of container ships that will go around the Cape of Good Hope. And there are also a series of like tall ships that you can ride on that are not super luxurious, but more for like that recreating an authentic experience, right? Where you can ride. But it takes like, a month to go out of like Ushuaia, Argentina, down into Antarctica and then back up around the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I were very, very, we were thinking about this when we became teachers. We're like, we'll always have summers off to go do things. And so that sounds like the perfect summer trip for two school teachers who don't have a lot of money and really want to suffer on a ship.
You could totally
Sounds
do it.
familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you mentioned journalism. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of journalism that Wallace did, which was like essayistic more than like straight articles of, he didn't see himself so much as reporting on a thing, but like adding some fictional flavor to it in a way. What's your take on that?
Well, it's like any author, right? So you read David Sedaris and you absolutely love Lou Sedaris and all of his crazy family, and you have to come away and say to yourself, well, are you going to be happy with knowing that that's a story and it may not actually be the entirety of his family dynamic? Yeah, I'll buy it because, it was entertaining. So, when I look at Wallace, I'm just really anything by him that I read or anybody else, I understand the context, or at least I try to. So, you don't have to Google very far to see what people have said and what the criticisms have been about his journalistic work. And, you enjoy the story, you read it, and then you go and look about what people have said, and you sort of make up your mind. So, yeah, I'm okay with him sort of taking liberties with what he did, because no one was going to him for the after day story about the fire. You know what I mean? It was like nobody was reading him because they needed information on a topic. You know what I mean? Like that's not why you read Wallace.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not why you read Wallace. That may not be why you read a lot of writers who are just really excellent at weaving a tale, but maybe not so great with their fact checking. And if you know that, then that's okay. I mean, that becomes a more difficult conversation in the era of fake news and of declining trust in public institutions like the government, like journalism, like media corporations. So that's definitely, we could have a whole panel and a whole discussion just on that aspect of it. But, considering
well, that's interesting though. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that it should be fact checked a little bit differently, right? Like that kind of nonfiction isn't necessarily wrong if we say, well, this guy actually has more to his personality. That it's like, is that a difference in fact checking?
No, I think what I'm saying is that David Foster Wallace is dead. His work has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we can look at it critically from a remove. That's what I'm trying to say. And if we are to interact with his work, we have a wealth of resources for how to interpret that work. And I don't know that someone who is not active in media ecosphere right now can be held to the same standards, or we can't hold people to those standards. You know what I mean? I think he would have I think he would have a very different career if he was still alive and he was continuing to write. And I think editors at a time ago would have made it very clear that he needed to pick a lane. You're either fiction or you're nonfiction. Right. But I haven't just happened to think that he's a special case because he's not with us anymore, and his work has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we look at that differently than we look at whatever the people at the New York Times or at the New Yorker are doing. I don't expect to read anything in the New York Times or in the New Yorker that's sort of fictional, but sort of not. I want to have a real sense of clarity about what I'm reading. And David Sedaris, for instance, has been very much on the record about what he writes, but he's not considered a journalist, right? He's considered an essayist, and he's an entertainer. And so I don't look at the kind of latitude that he takes with his own work the way that I would if I were looking at someone who's just a straight journalist that doesn't do anything but journalism.
Well, and I when you're talking there, it makes me think that the problem isn't, what those writers are doing. It's really readers, right? And the reader, if you're not able to discern the difference between different types of even nonfiction, there's this kind of belletristic tradition, and if you're reading a profile of an artist in The Believer, that's very different than reading the front page of the New York Times.
Sure.
And this expectation that I'm also thinking of this book, The Lifespan of a Fact, John DeGatta and this Believer fact checker. Have you guys seen this book? Or it was just made into a Broadway play with Daniel Radcliffe.
That's what Radcliffe's have been talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, he's fact checker for this Believer essay, and John DeGatta is very much an embellisher, right, or an artist who is he's drawing a distinction between an essay and an article.
Yeah.
And in the essay, like pretty much in the first sentence, there's like three things that the guy can fact check and say, no, this is actually not technically correct. And so they get into this huge kind of philosophical argument about, how do you represent truth? And Wallace, I'll have to find the quote. It's somewhere he said something that he writes fiction because that's the only place he can tell the truth.
Yeah.
Or that it's like nonfiction is about what's real and like fiction's about what's true.
Yeah. And again, I totally agree with that sentiment, and that's a very sophisticated sort of thing. It's very sophisticated. I cannot begin to tell you the kind of people that are out there reading, on the web. There is no media literacy. There is no reading literature and different genres within nonfiction and different genres within fiction. It's so polarized and fractured that people just really generally they can't make those distinctions because they don't even understand that they're there. People are constantly hounding me about, you're so opinionated. I'm like, well, I write an opinion column. So yeah,
there's a place for that.
There's a place for that. I'm not a beat reporter, and that's a very conscious choice. So it is really hard, when we get into discussions about what people are reading. There's a level of sophistication of people, like the three people that are having this conversation right now, that is not on a level of the average person that's out there scrolling through Google News or whatever the Facebook algorithm feeds them as news, who are able to make a distinction between an essay and an analysis and, an opinion and straight reporting and then day after reporting and long form reporting. And it's just, that's all inside ball for us.
Well, speak for yourself, Esther. Just kidding.
I think it's also incredibly hard to teach. And I'm sure you have opinions about how literacy changes and the ability to teach, learning and reading on different, even formats and, text that jumps around on a screen versus something that just scrolls through on your phone versus, a book and a magazine. All of these different formats alone, I think the mode of reading is very difficult now.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it's decontextualized, every link looks the same. It's very difficult to tell someone who's starting their writing career as a fourth grader why, a link from the World Wildlife Foundation is not the same as a link from Yahoo News. It looks the same. It comes up on a page the same. It's got pictures that, it looks similar. So it's a very difficult skill to teach, and it's not one that's being taught in schools with any kind of, long-term plan or set curriculum or level of rigor. And so we're that's going to cause problems down the road. It's already causing problems.
Sure.
I want to switch gears a little bit and go back and ask you about something on your most recent reread of Infinite Jest. Is that with a lot of our recent guests, we've talked about parts of the book that don't tend to age well or seem like Wallace just got wrong. And in a way that's interesting, and in a way it's like any book from 30 years ago seems dated in some ways.
Oh yeah.
Hey, speaking of which, our friend Matt Luter, friend of the show, just gave a paper in Alabama this weekend about the Wardeen Be Cry chapter.
Yes, and it was
that's
very much it's very much on my mind. I haven't read the paper, but I saw that was the topic of his paper. And so I want to ask your perspective on this as, not a white male. What was your first take? And then how do you cope with it on multiple rereads?
The entire book, or are you referring specifically to that?
Race and gender and stuff, all of that. The different voices that he's doing there with people of color and, anything that seems like maybe inappropriate or outdated.
Sure. Well, everything that I've read in my entire life has usually been something written by, a straight white person. So that's never been the lens that I've used to look at literature through. And that's just not even the way I was raised. I went to a Catholic school with an incredibly diverse student body and somehow magically wonderful teachers who were completely inclusive and, diverse. And it was a fairy tale that seemingly, from what I hear, no one else has had a good experience, as a person of color. So I may be the weirdo, but, it's interesting when I did read the book this last time, a couple weeks ago, when I finished it a couple weeks ago, I was specifically had my eye open about the Wardine and the poor Tony and that particular part of it. And when I had the first thing that struck me when I read Infinite Jest all the way through is that every voice, regardless of what kind of voice it was, seemed like a fully formed personality that was an individual unto themselves that's not representative of anyone else. Like it's really, when you're looking at literary criticism or if you're studying it academically, you're going to deconstruct a book by looking at archetypes and themes, etc. But to just read it as a reader, I'm looking to immerse myself in a world that seems real. And when I first read it, I thought every single one of these people, as outlandish as they are, seem to me like real people that I've met or real people that I've known. And real people are sexist. Real people are drug addicts. Real people are depressives. They have this whole wide variety. So I just sort of take it at its face value instead of, trying to derive sort of a larger value to it instead of trying to make it a cultural critique. Now, that said, I saw Matt Luter's tweet about talking about that particular aspect, the Wardine piece. And here's what I thought when I read it this last time. And I was listening very closely because I know that it can be seen as very offensive to people. And so as I listened to it, I took it in and I said to myself, you spent your whole last year working in an environment where the high poverty rate was 70% and 85% of your students were African American, low income, segregated in a community, lacking resources. The water in our school had lead in it. Is this the way the people in that community spoke? Is this the way?
Right. Is there verisimilitude?
Did this sound like someone who did their homework and went and listened to people talk and then recreated it for the purpose of having a characteristic in a book? And I said to myself, yes, this is the kind of conversations I had with students and parents, and this is how people talk in certain communities. And I don't think there's anything wrong with representing that in a book. The alternative is they're not represented at all. Is it perfect? No. But to the point of, I think it was Matt that said this in the recap from the conference episode. Do we really need every single author to be representative of everyone? I don't think so, because if that's true, then no Latino writer can write about just Latinos because they will be discriminating against everyone who's not Latino. You know what I mean? Like that just, you can't say that. And you also can't tell a Latino writer that they can't write about white people or about people that are of their opposite gender, because then, what are you saying? Then nobody can write about anybody that's not like them? If you don't want to read it, that's okay. That's totally up to you. But if you do read it, then you kind of have to accept that it's going to be imperfect, right? it's never going to rise to the challenge of being all inclusive in a respectful manner, in a way that everybody agrees that this is the right way to do it. It's just not going to happen.
I think some of the criticism of the Wardeen thing is that it was, some people say it was just bad. It was just done poorly. And that, I think part of the problem with it is that it was written when he was in grad school in like 1985, 1986, and he was trying to be like cool and say like, oh, I can write these urban characters that, you rich white kids from Arizona or the East Coast, they didn't really have there. And so in a way, I think it's criticized as being like almost exoticizing it. But I also just think for the way that it was done and at the time period he wrote it, it was just not great. It was like a grad student's idea at writing like an urban, inner city black character. And it maybe didn't sound like what a lot of people thought a urban, black inner city woman would sound like even in 1985. So I think that's a valid criticism.
I think that's a valid criticism as well. And I certainly am not saying it's not a valid criticism. Yeah. However, if that is a valid criticism, then I think we can also open it up and say that people who live in Boston and are of a lower socioeconomic status and are maybe even perhaps Irish immigrants can say the same thing about the working class people in Massachusetts that were portrayed in that book.
Right, and it was caricature almost. I mean, and it was a...
Absolutely.
Sorry, I have a helicopter flying over my house right now.
Okay, is the SWAT team coming for you finally?
We welcome all kinds of vehicles on this show.
Really
garbage trucks, helicopters.
So screwing up my recording. We're not in a professional recording studio. I should make a disclaimer.
Unlike Esther, who is.
No. But yeah, I mean, I think it's always going to fall short for someone, right? When we talk about 100 years of solitude, every single character in that book is a caricature. They just are, right? And I don't hold that against that book. And, many of us who have families in Latin America know that those caricatures are pretty spot on sometimes. And sometimes they're really not. And that's okay. I mean, you have to, no one ever unless you're in a college course or in high school or something, nobody ever forces you to read something. Pick it up. If you like it, great. Enjoy it. If you don't, put it down and move on to something else. Life's too short to just read something that you're not going to enjoy. I don't understand the concept of hate reading something. I just do not get it. I don't
know that I've ever done it. I've hated stuff that I've read, but not on purpose.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, you probably hated stuff that you were really hoping you'd like, and then it really disappointed you.
Yeah,
like perhaps even Insomnia.
That actually I don't even hate it, I just dislike it. But Tao Lin, I would put in that category as like, I don't know if you've read any of his books, but I started reading them 10 years ago, and I was like, everyone says like, oh, this guy's like up and comer, he's a hip, he's cool. I started reading it, I was like, oh, I actually really hate this. Like, I really hate it. Yeah. But I stopped reading him, and maybe his new book is good, but I will never find out because I don't care.
Yeah. I feel that way about Dave Eggers. I think he's probably immensely talented, and I know that people adore him. And I picked up, what is that book called?
Heartbreaking Work of Staggering
Genius. Yes, the Heartbreaking Work of Staggering. And I was like, I just put it down.
That's funny you say that, because I quite enjoyed that book when I read it, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever, for the first time. And all the other guys, like friends of mine who also read it, we all liked it. And then, Rachel, my wife, read it, and some of her girlfriends read it. And there was this really like interesting polar view on the book based on gender. And my theory about it is that like, I think that book is a really intimate look into the male psyche. And maybe for a guy who reads it, they're like, oh yeah, I can relate to this. And then for a woman who reads it, they're like, oh, this is what it's like in that in that skull that's like haunting and terrifying. And
No,
so
you know
maybe
what?
there's a different experience.
I disagree
background.
because I've read Joshua Ferris's last book. Oh God, the one about being Jewish. Do you know what I'm talking about, right? I can't remember what it was. And that book was just like all about being a guy. I don't think that's the issue with
That's
me.
not haunting.
Because
Okay.
So I will give about 1 minute on Dave Eggers, and then we're gonna have to move on because I can't.
Well, we gave
can't
Jonathan
have this on.
Franzen, at least 2.
So and Wallace has a long blurb on the back of the book, and I mean
Right.
I was living in New York and working in book publishing when that book came out, and it was a big freaking deal. There was a lot of hype behind it, and I remember rushing to the store, buying it, reading it, and just thinking like, one, I disagree with the premise that it's like even that heartbreaking of a book. Like,
Sure.
It's sad that both of his parents died. It's sad, but I was like, there's a lot more sad shit in the world, and like
It's pretty
at least you have
tongue in
this-
cheek, the title, though, right?
I get it, but if you put that as your title of
Sure.
your book, and the part about his parents' death and raising his brother is not tongue-in-cheek. He actually is trying to break your heart.
Sure.
And there, especially the stuff later on about spreading the ashes. I mean, Wallace cites this part as being like really pathetic, and I don't think that he wanted. He was conflicted about being sincere, and his follow-up book was terrible. And I thought, yes, there's something weird going on with him, where like whatever talent he does have is really kind of self-absorbed. Even though I really like what he's done with 826 and with McSweeney's and like McSweeney's books.
That's a
and
whole
like,
different story. Yeah.
he's built this whole other empire, and it's sort of fractured now. It's not the way that it used to be. So a lot has changed, and like his last book, Matt Luder and I actually were just tweeting about Heroes of the Frontier, which maybe that's 2 books ago now, but I just felt really bored with it.
So
Like,
many, man.
He had a good premise and like started writing it out, and then it was just like I just didn't give a shit. I just didn't care.
Yeah, but back to boy books, because I think this is one of the criticisms about Infinite Jest is that it's really a boys' book, and it's all about the male gaze on everything and everything, and that always makes me mad because if you subscribe to that, then no men will ever read books that have a lot of women in it. And they'll miss out. You know what I mean? Like when I think about Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, that story is all about 2 young boys throughout like all these years of their relationship. And it was written by a woman, and it was just a beautiful work. You can look at a million things, a million stories that are either about women that were written by women or by men or by whoever. I just don't buy this idea that you have to stick to a lane. And I don't buy the idea that some things are just, more for women than for men, unless you're really talking about genre. Like if you're talking about romance novels, then yeah, we're talking about a different story.
Yeah, I was not meaning to say with my comment that I'm saying that this book is for one subsection or the other. I'm just saying that the male psyche portrayed by Eggers in that book leaves people wanting. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, is this what it's like inside there? I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not.
I think that's a lot of books, though.
Sure.
I think that's just a lot of books. And
also they just thought he was like quite dumb and pathetic too. Like, why would you make these choices? They're very bad.
Yeah. Well, look at Popular Entertainment, right? I mean, didn't that movie about James Franco and Seth Rogen going to North Korea make a lot of money? Okay, there you go.
So that's another interesting thing is, and we really try not to have all white guys as guests on the podcast. I really just don't like the stereotype that if you like this book, it's like lit bro, culture and literature, and like you're part of the problem. It's just a punchline. We saw this thing in the New Yorker that came out the other day about like how to read Infinite Jest. It was in Shouts and Murmurs, and it was, I guess, supposed to be funny, but like one of the entries in it was like, get so inspired that you become a successful writer and then use the proceeds to start like a Wallace Foundation or society. And I was like, I already done all of this. Like, it's not really, I'm not a successful writer, but like actually we did start a Wallace society. Like what was a joke to her was like, it's just
the Matt Booker experience.
My life is a punchline. And it's like, in a way I try to like, just not think about that. Like, I don't really know how to avoid it other than like what we've done, which is like the Wallace Society most successfully has only posted stuff that is about diversity and about race and gender and sexuality, and like how give us some advice, Esther. Like what else should we do to I don't know, be better?
Well, just like from the podcast standpoint, keep inviting.
Start there.
Just keep inviting people that have different perspectives. Like, I would love to hear these people who dislike, certain sections of Infinite Jest because of the way they portray, let's say, a racial or ethnic minority. I would love to have someone who really, truly enjoyed the book or finds merit in the work to come and have a debate about that. So I mean, like, as
make
much
it more
as you
of
can,
a hot seat situation. I like it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, hearing those perspectives, I would be interested. I would be interested in hearing about, people that just feel that it could have been done differently, or maybe people who, just disagree, but represent, a type of person that was represented in that book. Like, if you could find someone that was hideously deformed and wanted to come and talk about Wallace's treatment of hideously deformed people, that would be totally fascinating. Good luck with that. I would say keep writing about it and keep being open to having those conversations, even if they're not on the podcast, but on Twitter, on the blog, at conferences. I think that's important. And the people that want to find that information will obviously find it and have something more to think about. But, I think you do the right thing by not sort of either arguing about it or ignoring it.
I mean, and if you're listening to this and you do have a different perspective, like, reach out to us, get in touch, get in part of the conversation. And that's one thing.
Yeah, because if you're listening, you've got to care, right?
Absolutely. And it's one thing I love about you on Twitter is that, like, you're part of the conversation because you jump in and, like, you can just reach out to people and say what you think. And, like, I think just being part of the conversation, however, that evolves, is like one of our goals. And even beyond the podcast, right? Like, broadly, just with Wallace being part of the cultural conversation, which he still is if the New Yorker's writing things about him, right?
Exactly.
And putting it in there. He still is this like shorthand for something. And sometimes those, critiques land better than others. But I feel like almost everyone we've had on the podcast is looking at him in some critical way, and it's really like a filter through which you can process a lot of your own ideas. I mean, have you felt like that?
Oh, absolutely. I have learned so much from listening to the people that talk on this podcast.
I meant Wallace, not trying to brag about my podcast.
Oh, no, I will brag about this. Well, okay, we can talk about that, but I want to brag about the podcast because I've been...
Oh, golly.
I have been, gotten the opportunity to listen to critiques as well as analysis from people that are just, at such a high level that it's almost over my head. Last month's person, I was like, wow, what I don't know about literature, is just so stark. So, I mean, it was really awesome for me to hear someone that has that expertise talk about something that I'm very familiar with and that I love and expanding my way of looking at it. So, I mean, that's a really good thing. But what did you mean with your question that I misinterpreted to brag about your podcast that I love so much?
No, I just meant like, that we're able to have these conversations around his work because maybe the work itself is a big enough filter where we can get all of these different, even dissenting views in there. But now that you've brought up podcasts in general, I feel like I've learned a lot about other podcasts and discovered other podcasts by following you. So I want to talk just briefly, if you could give us a breakdown of like what you love about the forum, I know you're a big fan of like the Max FunCon crew. Like, give us a breakdown of like how you discovered them and like what you're a huge fan of, like podcasts, right?
Oh, I love podcasts. I just love podcasts. I used to love radio. I mean, I'm old enough to have loved radio. And I'm an only child of 2 working parents, and I spent a lot of time with books, newspapers, TV, and radio, because that was what came into my house. So I just adore podcasts. So I was reading the CJR newsletter, which I get, the Columbia Journalism Review. And there was this little blurb at the bottom saying that they were doing this podcast hosted by this guy named Jesse Thorne. And I was like, what? Who is this guy? I've never heard of this guy. And I was like, well, let's see what this podcast from the CJR is all about. And it was basically just interviews of really incredible journalists. And the person that did it, his name's Jesse Thorne. And sort of at the end of it was a limited run podcast. He was like, well, I'm part of the Max Fun podcast network. And I was like, well, what is that? I didn't know. So I went on and I found these podcasts, and that's how I found Jordan Jesse Go and Judge John Hodgman and Bullseye, which is another one that I really love.
Bubble Show.
Yeah, the Bullseye, the whole show. And I just loved it. So I just started like listening to every single episode. And that's how I sort of got into the Max Fun podcasts. Now, they will sometimes do podcasts with other people. So Jordan Jesse went on to Hello from the Magic Tavern this summer to sort of do, they were promoting their new podcast, Bubble. And like, I fell in love with Hello from the Magic Tavern. So I'm making my way through all of Hello from the Magic Tavern. And then there's a little spin-off show that they did called Hey Riddle Riddle, which is all about lateral thinking puzzles and riddles. And I fell in love with that. In addition to all these other podcasts that I already listened to, the long form, on the
Casual
media,
Birder.
The Casual Birder, yes. Birding, like
did Franzen get you onto that one too?
No, absolutely not. No, actually, I met the lady that does the Casual Birder. She is a fan of the Max Fun podcasts, and we sort of met online talking about our love for Judge John Hodgman and a lot of the Max Fun podcasts. And I've always liked birds casually, and I sort of got into her. I got into her podcast, so I'm really into that now. So, and of course, Malcolm Gladwell has an amazing podcast, and Katie Couric does a really great job with her podcast. And of course, On the Media, as a journalist, I listen to the On the Media podcast, and I listen to the Columbia Journalism Reviews podcast and the Brookings Institution's podcast. I mean, I literally have my earbuds in at every possible moment.
So Matt asked you earlier, how do you have time for all the books and then all the shows? But then you just really ramped it up for us even more. So
yeah, so I'm
the plot thickens.
I mean, you're an omnivore,
really
Esther.
And it's really annoying for my family because I'll be in the kitchen making dinner, and then somebody will be like, hello, I'm talking to you. And then I'll be annoyed because like somebody interrupted Usador's, introduction of himself as the wizard of the fifth realm of Ephesius. And I'll be like, what do you want? You know what I mean? So it's like, really, it's not the best thing. I try to not laugh maniacally too much, but I do. So I'm annoying to my family. I've come to, just embrace that.
Well, I discovered the Jesse Thorne stuff a long time ago through the Metafilter. I was really big into Metafilter around like 2006, 2007, 2008, and like all of those guys, John Hodgman, all of them had accounts there. And so like whenever Jesse Thorne published his first like radio show, got a lot of attention on there. And I used to listen to a whole different crop of podcasts back then that don't exist anymore. And there was a really great one called Film Spotting that had 3 hosts in around 12 years ago.
Wow.
And then Jesse Thorne had his tagline for a while was like America's Radio Sweetheart.
Oh, it's on Jordan Jesse Go. He's still America's
still
Radio
says
Sweetheart.
That. Yeah. America's Radio Sweetheart.
It's still ironic. He still knows.
That was from the very beginning.
Yeah. The Sound of Young America.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
That was his first one, right? Sound of Young America.
Yeah, and he and Jordan were doing that in college. They've been doing it for, it's been, almost 12 years, and
that's
over
what I was going to say, about
500 episodes of Jordan Jesse Go. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I listen to a lot of hard journalism and crazy funny, just ridiculous rated R stuff that, is not...
It's entertaining, right?
Yeah, it's just super entertaining. So I get half and half, right? So half of it is like stuff that I should know and stuff that's good for me, my vegetables, and then, my junk food is the other stuff that I listen to. So I do try and balance.
So are you saying that we need to have more swearing on our show, Esther?
No, not necessarily.
More toilet humor and the like.
It's very jarring. There. It's very jarring when you get used to a podcast being a certain way and then the host decide to go in a different direction. I have another podcast that I won't name, and I love this podcast. And ever since President Trump got into office, the host of this podcast is just like F-bombing all the time.
He's just infuriated perpetually.
Totally warranted and totally understandable, but I'm just like, I cringe every time I hear her drop the F-bomb, and I'm like, oh, but you're this respected person that, used to be like PBS quality, and now I have to hear you say like all these swear words, and I feel kind of icky about it. But you do you, if you want to swear, you go for it. I will stick with you.
Thanks, Esther.
We had a lot of debate at first if we had one F-bomb, did we have to put that explicit tag on there, and Dave said yes. So some of our podcasts do say explicit on it, but we tried to cut. I've personally tried to cut back a little bit.
I don't remember any explicit stuff. Huh.
Yeah, Dave could probably tell you which time code on the file it was.
Yeah, I think it's like I read the iTunes terms of service for if you're putting a podcast on, and I think it's like, if you have, a certain list of words, you have to put that episode is explicit. So I think about half of our episodes are, that could.
But I want to give one more shout out to a podcast that I think we both like, which is Zigzag Pod.
Yes, Manoush Samarodi and Jen Poyant.
So, yeah, Manoush. There's a Wallace connection here, which is that Zigzag is on the Civil platform.
Yes.
And that is also our friend of the pod, Maria Bustillos.
Yeah, Popula.
Popula is also on the Civil platform. And Maria has been, she is a Wallace critic and writer herself, has written a lot of influential pieces on Wallace, and has been my friend for like over a decade and over 2 decades. I've known Maria forever.
Oh, wow.
And is like actual good friend of mine who's done some stuff here in Austin. And after Wallace died in 2009, I produced a memorial for him at a Salvage Vanguard Theater, and Maria came and was one of the speakers, and she did this thing about like Nabokov and the Ice Queen and Wallace, and it was like she's never, I don't know, maybe she published it somewhere else. I don't think she ever did, but so anyways, she's like a longtime Wallace aficionado and expert, going way back to the very beginning when Infinite Jest came out. And,
I can tell from just reading her latest piece, "The Artist is the Art." I could tell. You could tell that she both loves him and can be very critical and analytical about the work, which is what you want, right? I mean, I'm not looking to always interact with people who absolutely love every single thing he's ever written and are just like acolytes. I mean, I'm a regular person. Nobody's perfect. So, not every single piece of writing is going to change your life. So it's really nice to see, someone who's that learned about a topic that can be both a fan and someone who is critical and analytical about a work.
Yeah, that's much more interesting, certainly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and that's proof that I could bring almost any topic back to David Foster Wallace.
Of course.
A blessing and a curse.
My family would agree with you on that one.
I mean, it's when you talk with anyone who's like really into one thing. Like when I was in middle school, I used to talk a lot about like hardcore rap. And I felt like
Wu-Tang Clan and East Coast stuff, or
NWA.
Oh, okay.
NWA was just
boy.
So like anything we could bring back to like hip hop lyrics, rap lyrics. Just anything in conversation. That's what we were obsessed with. That's what we live and breathe with.
Strong case of this with Seinfeld in the I'd say
I still
early
do
2000s.
that with Seinfeld.
I still do as well, yeah, but certainly like tapered off, I would say, after I read Infinite Jest. I kind of transitioned a little bit more towards that.
Oh my gosh.
Well, and you're that kind of way with Netrunner. No offense.
Oh yeah. I try and keep it toned down as much as I can on here, but sometimes it just comes out, Matt.
I'm just saying, if you're really into something, you can bring it back to it.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of which, I went to the World Championships in September. We haven't even talked about that at all. So
oh my goodness.
maybe the year in review we'll touch on that.
Yeah,
quickly.
we'll have to mention that. And I've been also on my mind. Last weekend, I was moderated a panel at Texas Book Festival.
Yes, that's right.
And so I have a lot to say about that experience and conversation and
good deal.
People I met there and things. So we'll save some of that for next month in December, maybe.
Yeah,
wrap
late
up the year.
December, early January usually is when we go.
I can't believe it's already that time of year to talk about wrap up.
2019 planning already.
Oh, I bet.
So I feel like we could talk to Esther about all of this stuff. Like there's so many other.
She contains multitudes.
And
Yes.
As she's demonstrated.
Don't get me started. And if you're only going to watch one thing on TV, for Pete's sake, please watch Better Call Saul. I love that show so much. It's so good.
I got about 5 or 6 episodes
shows.
in, and then for whatever reason, we just moved on to other things and just forgot to go back. But I've been hearing really good stuff in like the last year, so I intend to go back
to it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I watched all of Breaking Bad twice, and I would say I love Better Call Saul even more than I love Breaking Bad.
I've heard people say that, yeah, and that makes me truly want to watch it more.
Absolutely.
Our daughter has this yellow rain suit, and there was a picture of it that came out of her daycare recently. This was before Halloween, and we kind of looked at each other and we're like, what if she goes as Walter White for Halloween?
Oh,
in the
boy.
meth lab, and so we started
You're not
going to
regret that in a couple of years at all.
Started brainstorming, further ideas, and then we were like, well, she's 1.5, so do we really want that to be the photo? So she went as Eeyore instead.
Oh, wow, like the polar opposite.
Yeah. It's like we could go really cute here or something a bit darker.
Yes.
I think we did the right thing.
Well, I dressed as a playing card queen for Halloween.
You did, and
I was so excited.
Impressed. What an elaborate costume that was. Because you also collect really nice, ornate, custom playing cards.
Yes.
With
have all
curiosity
these
that is
crazy,
just bewildering to me. How many packs of cards do you own?
Oh, at least 100. I'm trying to get my husband to build me like a custom set of ledges where I can display them all so that I can look at them every day instead of
they're beautiful.
I have them packaged. Yeah. Oh, they're gorgeous.
What is the best way to derive these highly custom art cards that you get? What's the main website that you go to, or?
Oh, Art of Play. For sure, Art of Play, and they carry a lot of the ones. I'd say awesome. I've gotten 95% of my collection from Art of Play, and the other 5% is individual artists' Kickstarters.
Right, yeah.
So if you go on Kickstarters and you look for playing cards, you're going to find some amazing things. I have a deck coming to me in a couple of weeks that has a custom case, and it's actually called the Esther Star deck, which I'm so excited because I never have anything with my name on it. And I have another one that's a moon deck that's a standard deck of playing cards, but when you riffle the deck, it actually shows you a little
like a
illustration.
Comic? Oh, fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, it shows I believe it shows the moon going through its phases.
Cool.
If you riffle it when it's in order. So
I like
I'm so excited about that coming. So Christmas will come early for me, I think, because those are scheduled to ship in the next month or so. But I think I'm probably going to package them up and give them to myself for Christmas since,
Right. So are you playing a lot of cribbage with these? Like, what's your main jam?
No, not at all.
No
I
games?
I don't play games at all. Like I will play poker on Saturday night with my son and his friends and my husband. We'll play rummy, which is super boring, a super boring game, but I love it. But no, I just love the artistry of it, and I love cardistry, which is it's not magic tricks. It's just manipulating the cards in an artful way with your hands. So I think it's a beautiful art form as opposed to really caring about, the games aspect of it. So yeah.
It's the same reason I love like collecting stamps, is like a small piece of paper with art on it.
Yes.
And like, I'm intrigued.
Exactly.
So I think I told you I have probably like 15 or 20 decks. And some of the same ones as you do, but like some just random different ones.
Sure.
And like I think they're just a really great format. I mean, especially for people who love, it's kind of infinite possibilities, and it's all standardized, usually same size. So it's like it's a experiment with form. It's really cool.
Yeah. Exactly.
I really love it.
Yeah, so like, the David Foster Wallace Society could put out an infinite deck
of cards.
a deck of cards featuring all of this art that all of your contributors have made. And it could be like, because I have tons of decks where there are 52 totally different card backs. Like the card front is the same, but the card back is different. And each, like you get another little card in it that says who designed each one.
Right.
And like all of the art, the David Foster Wallace community art could be made into, a deck of 52 cards easily. You could sell that at the conference. And
see, we got to be our marketing manager. This
absolutely,
is great.
yeah. No, I'm ready with the ideas.
Okay.
This is great.
Wow.
So
I love that. We're gonna talk about that, Matt, I think.
Yeah.
For
real.
For sure, I
want to
will
do
buy
that.
many, many decks. Because I have some decks that I never open and some decks that I do open. So I do have some that I've just hoarded and I haven't brought myself to open yet. So I end up buying a lot of like double decks so that I can play with one and then keep one in its pristine packaging. So yeah, definitely. I'd be buying a brick of those.
Well, we did just print the society just printed pens, and I actually don't even have one yet. Andrea has them all yet.
Oh yeah, they arrived.
I want to do want to do pens. We did pens. I want to do like journals and notebooks. I love journals and moleskin.
Oh my
field
gosh,
notes,
I collect those too. I just don't put them on Instagram. I have a whole cabinet full of them, and they're just there waiting to be written in, and I'm not writing in them. I'm just collecting them.
Same.
Because they're so beautiful.
And I have so many blank ones, and I'm going to buy so many more blank ones before the year is over.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So we will get to that. The cards. I feel like you are like we could just talk all the time.
I'm sure
we
could.
This is really great. Like having you on the show is a dream for us. Like I've really wanted to be able to sit down with you. I hope we can do it in person sometime at the conference or something.
I'm totally coming to this conference. The only reason I didn't go last time is because I'd already committed to going to Max FunCon, and so it happened at the same time. And when you guys announced that this one was going to be in July or whenever, I don't even remember what the date is, but I was like, oh, I'm there. I am so there. So we will see each other. In fact, I was going to say, if you're going to fly into O'Hare, I will drive you guys down there because I'll be driving.
Oh, that's a beautiful offer. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. It would be so much fun. Yeah.
It's like a 2-hour drive or something? Hour and a half?
I think it's probably more like 3 or 4. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I usually drive it from Chicago down last year, or this year I should say. I did it by myself, and that was not near as fun. So I like driving with a friend so that we can, just talk the whole way, just like we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you stop and get like a giant bag of Cheetos and some pop, and you're like, eating the candy, and you feel terrible the next day, but that's okay.
I always go to Portillo's and
sure.
get like a hot dog and Italian beef.
Yeah, of course.
Or pizza. Maybe if you can direct me to a good pizza place between O'Hare and Bloomington Normal.
I think there's probably a couple. There a lot of the really good pizza chains around here, like the really classic deep dish pizza, or even the thin tavern style pizza. The exurbs have grown so much in the metropolitan area that a lot of those places have locations, well outside the city. So that might actually be an option.
See, I just need to get the download
scoops, man.
from you.
That's right. You got to get your Sherpa.
That's right.
your Chicago pizza Sherpa.
Chicago Sherpa. That's great. All right.
Sign me up.
Is there anything we were going to mention at the beginning that we did not? Anything that before we wrap up that you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered just about everything. I mean, like I said, I have all these crazy interests that I could just go on and on and on about. And David Foster Wallace is one of my favorite ones. So I really appreciate that you've given me the opportunity to talk to two other people who love him as much as I do.
Anytime. It's our pleasure. That's definitely, of my varied interests, like one of the ones that's lasted the longest. So
yeah, me too.
Maybe we get another round of 40 more episodes. Maybe you'll come on again.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Anytime.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much, Esther. We really appreciate
No
all
problem.
the
Thank
engagement
you.
and all the fun conversations we have on social media with you. It's been like you discovered our show this year, right? I think.
Yep.
And the notifications just started pouring in, and it was so affirming to have you be a listener of our show. It was such a blast.
I just
to hear
felt
about your
so
experience listening
relieved.
to all these different episodes, because you commented on a lot of individual episodes, right?
And
great.
I was just so relieved to find like other people that were like me. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have any community. I'm not an academic. I'm not, on a campus. I'm not hooked into the literary scene.
Yeah.
So to just be able to hear people that have this same passion in one place, it was just like super affirming for me, because I'm like the only person I know that, besides the people that I've browbeaten into reading this book in my immediate family, that have actually read it and enjoyed it. So thank you for doing this podcast.
Well, and I would say to anyone who's listening out there, if you listen to a podcast and you're on Twitter or you're able to send an email, like tell those people that you like the show. And
it goes a long way.
I did this. Yeah. I did this today with. I've been listening to this podcast called Decoder Ring from Slate, and I really liked it. And I was like, I should just go on there and tell them I like the show. And like, I'm not the kind of person who's going to sit down and write a long review of a podcast.
Yeah.
I probably should. Like, I should get better at it. But I feel like I can give a one-line tweet at someone without too much thought. Yeah. Whereas like writing a review is a little more of an obligation, but we love it. We need people who do that.
Yeah.
So if you have the ability and the time, write a review of your favorite podcast. If you don't, send those people a tweet and say, hey, we really love your show, because it really makes them feel like they're not just speaking into a void.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally.
Dave, I think we have some upcoming... we have some business, and then we're going to... turn off the computers for tonight eventually. But we have some upcoming exciting stuff for our Patreon listeners. This is kind of a new thing for us, but Dave and I have been working on a couple of plans. Hopefully we can be able to send our patrons something new and fun. I won't spoil it, but I want to thank them. I guess this is where we get into the acknowledgments and the credits. Our show is edited and produced by Dave Laird.
It's also produced by you, Matt. I'd say we co-produce it.
No, I'm just the talent. I just show up and record.
Yeah, you're just here for color, Matt. I'm here for the hard scholarship. Hey.
So Dave does all of the post-production work on our show, and like if there were show credits, he would get a lot of the show credits because he does all the work.
It's grueling work.
It is.
Yeah,
it can be. Yeah, it's sometimes long. But yeah, we want to thank our patrons so much. Esther, you are one of them. So thanks again, Esther.
No, it's my pleasure.
We want to also re-mention and re-thank Michelle Martin, because I mentioned her last episode and her name kind of got cut off at the end because we got into how to pronounce your last name. And that was not your fault, Esther, at all. It was my fault. So I just want to make sure that Michelle Martin gets a really specific and awesome thanks. And I've hung out with her recently. She was at the Parquet Court show, and she's come over to Victoria for some Wallace beers that we went out for last year. And so thanks, Michelle. We also want to thank Becky Madison, who is a friend of ours from Portland. She came out to the conference, I guess, a year and a half ago, Matt. And she was just a listener of the show and was like kind of on the fence about it. But she kind of like you, Esther. She was like, I don't have a lot of people to talk to about this, but maybe I should come to this conference. Is that a crazy thing to drive across the country for? And we were like, yeah, come do it. And she did. And so that was great. So thanks, Becky. We also want to thank Dean Jones, Brandon Douglas.
And Becky won our anagram contest.
That's right. She did. What was her name again? You remember this, Matt?
Snakebite Tom.
Snakebite Tom. That's right.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, real good. Dean Jones, Brandon Douglas, Samuel Patty, Michael Bates, Raul Jose Mendez, Sean Conboy, and Ben Zimmerman are all new patrons since the last episode. Thank all of you so much.
Yay.
We really, really appreciate it and feel just really valued. And so it's really cool that you partnered with us for helping the show keep growing. So thank you.
And I want to give a shout out to Robin O'Neill, who did we took her artwork and made a logo out of it. She has an amazing podcast. If you have not listened to it, it's called Me Reading Stuff.
Yes,
and
so good.
She has also just released her first merch.
Yeah, her shirts and her sweaters,
a t-shirt and a sweatshirt.
Yeah, I still got to get one of those.
I got one. It's awesome. So go and support Robin. If you love her show, get a shirt. I think the link is on her Instagram.
Yep, that sounds right. Is it really soft? She talked for about
really
3
soft.
minutes about how soft the shirts are, and so
it is.
Yeah.
It's made by some place called Cotton Bureau.
Yeah.
It's like really, really soft. Really nice.
That's a huge selling feature for me. I am very selective about the shirts that I buy based on the softness or what company makes them. Like Gildan, get out of here. You're sandpaper to me.
It's trash. Yeah. Cotton Bureau is probably the softest that I've found. But
okay, sign me up.
Oh,
cool. Where can people find us, Matt, online if they want to hang out?
We're pretty much Concavity Show. I think if you go on Twitter, if you go on Instagram, if you go on
Patreon,
Gmail, and Patreon, you get Concavity Show. We're easy to find.
Yeah, that's us. That's all the business I can think of. Anything else, Matt? Any final thoughts, Esther?
No, I had such a great time. Thank you.
Oh, cool. It's been such a blast.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
This has been episode 42.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Turn on the white noise murmur of the AM band and the last classic rock band's last solid record.
Yep, there it is.
It's firing.
Yep,
Good.
I see it. I see all the beautiful little waves going up and down.
Oh, good.